In the dim corridors of Balmoral Castle, as the world quietly continued unaware, history was about to shift. Queen Elizabeth II, the unshakable monarch who had stood through decades of triumphs and tragedies, was living her final moments, and, beside her, not Charles, not William, but Princess Anne. The daughter who had been so often overlooked by the press, yet so deeply trusted by her mother, found herself not just at the Queen's side, but at the very center of a moment that would redefine royal history. Just 2 minutes before the Queen slipped away, a soft voice whispered a confession, a request that would never be recorded in royal documents. And Anne, still holding her mother's hand, nodded silently. What followed would stun the royal household and leave Camilla shaken to her core. It hadn't been planned. Anne hadn't expected to be there. Her schedule had her going south, but fate, some would say destiny, had other plans. After spending 2 days on the West Coast, she returned to Balmoral, intending only a short stop. But the Queen's condition deteriorated swiftly, almost as if her body knew it could finally let go once Anne returned. On September 8, 2022, with the castle cloaked in tense silence and the staff on alert, Anne became the sole constant figure beside the Queen's bed. She wasn't just a daughter in mourning. She was a witness to the end of an era. The Queen drifted in and out of consciousness, but when she was lucid, she worked. Even on her deathbed, the red box arrived, state documents needing signatures, policies needing approval. And the Queen, frail but determined, signed. Because to her, duty had never been optional. It had been her identity. And it was in those quiet, wrenching moments when the weight of 70 years of rule finally pressed down on her chest that she turned to Anne and uttered her final personal request. This wasn't a declaration of legacy. It wasn't a plea for remembrance or grandeur. It was something much simpler and far more powerful. The Queen, weary yet unwavering, asked Anne to ensure that her final act wouldn't disrupt her people, that her death wouldn't be about spectacle or symbolism. She didn't want the grand processions or the noise of London. She feared that dying in Balmoral would complicate everything for the nation. She wanted, even in death, to serve quietly, to go as she had lived in the background, steadfast and loyal to her people. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. And Anne, steady, composed, yet visibly shaken, gave her silent promise. No fanfare, no public drama, just dignity. What no one expected was the ripple that this dying wish would cause, especially for Camilla. Because when Anne spoke of it later publicly, and for the first time, it wasn't just a memory, it was a mirror. It held up the Queen's values, her subtle disapproval of chaos and spectacle, and her obsession with control, even in the face of death. And Camilla, now Queen Consort, had built her image on the very opposite: transformation, reinvention, and yes, controversy. What Anne shared wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a challenge. But it exposed a contrast that had been long buried beneath royal politeness. As the Queen's breath faded and Anne remained by her side, a quiet power shifted within the monarchy. Because in those final 2 minutes, a dying sovereign didn't choose her heir to carry her most personal legacy. She chose her daughter. And the consequences of that whisper, of that confession, would not remain hidden for long. But what was this? Final wish? And why did it shake the very foundation of Camilla's role in the monarchy? Princess Anne just revealed what the Queen whispered before passing. And it wasn't the kind of royal command carved into legacy. It was a vulnerable plea, one that shattered the calm of the palace corridors and left Camilla paralyzed in disbelief. Queen Elizabeth II, the very emblem of tradition, the monarch who never flinched under pressure, had asked for something deeply personal, something unexpected. In those final fading moments at Balmoral Castle, her thoughts weren't of legacy or ceremony. They were of chaos, of disruption, and of the public. She feared her death would cause unnecessary turmoil, not emotionally, but logistically. Dying at Balmoral, far from London, meant protocols would spiral. Ceremonies would need reworking. State operations would scramble to adjust. It was her worst fear, causing a national inconvenience. For most, this might seem like overthinking. But for Elizabeth, who had spent her entire life organizing, preparing, and serving, it was the ultimate nightmare to pass away in the wrong place, at the wrong time. So she made a quiet request. She wanted to be moved. She didn't want her final breath to complicate the carefully constructed machinery of British mourning. She even offered to leave Balmoral, her beloved Scottish retreat, the place she had always felt safest. And most shocking of all, she wanted to plan her own funeral, down to the smallest detail. Because control wasn't just habit, it was survival. A lifetime of reigning had taught her that missteps had consequences, that every move, even in death, must serve the crown. But this request alarmed those closest to her, especially Charles and Anne. For decades, they'd watched their mother carry the weight of the throne. But now, faced with the stark reality of her fading health, they saw what she couldn't. She had earned the right to let go. So they stepped in, not as heirs or officials, but as children. Anne, always pragmatic. Charles, quietly emotional. Together, they told her no. She shouldn't be burdened with her own departure. That wasn't her job anymore. In that intimate moment, roles reversed. The monarch became the mother, and the children became protectors. They asked her to trust them to step back for once, to simply be human. After decades of service, that conversation was perhaps the most personal moment she ever shared with them. And finally, she relented. But when Princess Anne shared this with the world, there was another layer, one that no one could ignore. In her carefully chosen words, Anne offered a surprising acknowledgement of Camilla. She praised her for standing by Charles, for supporting the monarchy in ways that few believed she ever could. But then came the dagger, not a natural fit. Just 5 words, yet those words echoed like a tremor beneath the palace floor. For many, it was a backhanded compliment. For Camilla, it was something else entirely, a crack in the foundation she'd fought so hard to cement. After all these years of rehabilitation, of public acceptance, of becoming queen consort, Anne's subtle judgment reopened old wounds. The public noticed. Commentators dissected it. What did Anne truly mean? Was it a final verdict passed down not just from a sister-in-law, but from the daughter who inherited the queen's silent authority? But one question remained unanswered, one that cast a longer shadow than all the others. Why did the queen choose Anne to carry her last wish? Why not Charles, the future king? Why not William, the face of the monarchy's next era? There was something deeper in this choice, something that would reveal the true heir to Elizabeth's quiet, commanding legacy. She was the queen's only daughter, but their bond ran deeper than blood. And it was this bond that crowned Anne with her mother's final trust, a trust not handed down lightly, but earned through decades of loyalty, sacrifice, and silence. Princess Anne never sought the spotlight. While her brothers often found themselves on the front pages, tangled in controversy or spectacle, Anne remained steady, relentless in duty, reliable in silence. The royal family may have been built on tradition, but its backbone was Anne. She became known as the most dependable royal, a title not granted by media hype, but by consistent service, quiet strength, and a stubborn refusal to falter. And unlike many within her family, Anne's name was never splashed across tabloid scandals. She walked the line with discipline, not detachment. Even in her early years, when the queen was consumed by royal duties, traveling the globe and meeting heads of state, Anne never complained. She understood the burden of the crown long before she would ever feel its weight. While others crumbled, under royal expectation, Anne endured. And as she grew older, that unspoken understanding transformed into something even rarer in royalty: genuine closeness. Shared passions, not pomp, bridged the distance. Horses, dogs, and a relentless work ethic connected mother and daughter in a way no title ever could. When Anne rode in competitions, it wasn't about prestige, it was about proving something to herself and to the Queen. In 1976, she became the first British royal to compete in the Olympics, and though she didn't win gold, she won something far more enduring: her mother's pride. The Queen, typically restrained in emotion, showed unmistakable admiration. It was as if, for the first time, she saw a reflection not just of a daughter, but of herself. The same grit, the same discipline, the same refusal to surrender to public expectation. Years later, the Queen made it official. She granted Anne the title of Princess Royal, the highest honorary title a monarch can give to their eldest daughter. It wasn't just symbolic, it was personal, a recognition of unwavering loyalty in a family often torn apart by infighting. And when Queen Elizabeth II died, it was Anne, not Charles, not William, who escorted her coffin from Scotland to London. Through every somber mile, Anne remained composed, guarding her mother one final time. The symbolism was profound. It wasn't just a duty, it was devotion. And in that long, quiet journey, the world finally saw the bond that had always been there, just beneath the surface. But this iron bond wasn't just built on loyalty. It was forged through public defense during times of royal criticism. When the world doubted Queen Elizabeth's love for her children, Princess Anne stepped into the fire and didn't flinch. The headlines were relentless. Critics painted the Queen as emotionally distant, a mother more devoted to the throne than her own flesh and blood. But while others remained silent, Anne didn't hesitate. In a rare and unfiltered BBC interview, she dismantled the narrative with the same precision and fierceness she had always brought to her royal duties. There was no wavering in her voice, no doubt in her words. She spoke with conviction, not because she had to, but because no one else would. Anne didn't sugarcoat the truth. She acknowledged the reality that their mother wasn't like most. That being raised by a woman who bore the weight of a nation was not easy, and certainly not typical. But that didn't mean she didn't care. Anne rejected the idea that love had to be loud, visible, or traditional. She described a different kind of love. One that was quiet, enduring, and deeply rooted in responsibility. According to her, the Queen didn't need to say she loved her children every day. She showed it in the life she sacrificed, in the service she upheld, and in the moments of tenderness that no press photographer ever captured. She made it clear. Her mother loved all her children. There was no debate, no ambiguity. Anne believed it, felt it, and lived it. She even went further, calling the rumors absurd and insulting, saying they beggared belief. It wasn't just a defense, it was a battle cry. Because Anne knew that once public perception hardened, it was nearly impossible to change. And she refused to let that false image define the woman she had known intimately. Her mother may have worn a crown, but Anne had seen her without it. She knew the human being behind the Queen, and that human being had loved her children more fiercely than the world would ever understand. Anne's refusal to let the media rewrite her mother's legacy didn't just show loyalty, it cemented her place as the Queen's most trusted defender. And that trust wasn't built in a single interview. It had been earned over decades through unwavering presence, sharp words when needed, and an unshakable belief in the values her mother stood for. In that moment, Anne didn't just protect the Queen's image, she safeguarded her memory. She turned herself into a living shield against the rising tide of criticism, and in doing so, revealed just how deep that mother-daughter bond truly ran. Yet, Anne's own life wasn't without pain, and the cracks began to show in her personal story. They looked like the perfect royal couple, a princess and a decorated military man bound not just by title, but by passion, horses, duty, discipline. When Princess Anne and Captain Mark Phillips first appeared in public, the monarchy leaned into the image. It was clean, it was traditional, it was everything the royal institution needed to display in the wake of rising modern pressures. They had met through their shared love of equestrian competition, and that bond, forged in arenas and stables, seemed stronger than any crown. By the time their engagement was announced in 1973, the public was enamored, and when they married that November, the world watched with hope. Anne, in her high-collared gown, and Queen Mary's fringed tiara, just like her mother had worn, stood at the threshold of what was promised to be a fairy tale. But behind palace walls, that illusion was already cracking. Their shared love of horses was never the problem. In fact, it was the only thing that continued to connect them as time passed. The Queen, always more emotionally reserved in public, showed genuine joy when Anne became a mother. The birth of Peter, then Zara, brought visible happiness to Buckingham Palace. For a moment, it looked as though Anne had broken free from the emotional constraints that once marked her own childhood. But what the public didn't see was the slow and painful erosion of her marriage. Beneath the discipline, behind the carefully arranged photo ops, was distance, a cold, unspoken detachment. And soon, betrayal. The infidelity wasn't whispered, it was exposed. Mark Phillips, the quiet soldier and royal-approved son-in-law, had fathered a child with another woman, Heather Tonkin, an art teacher from New Zealand. But what made the scandal even more damaging was how it was covered up. Mark didn't simply hide the affair, he created a fake consulting job for Tonkin, channeling annual payments to her under the guise of equestrian services. It was deliberate, calculated, a deception that revealed just how fractured the marriage had become. And yet, Anne remained silent. The royal code of stoicism ran deep. There were no emotional interviews, no bitter press statements, just distance. Years of it. From the outside, they lived parallel lives, separate homes, separate commitments, and separate realities. While Charles and Diana's unraveling dominated headlines, Anne's crumbling marriage was quieter, but no less heartbreaking. And when the formal divorce came in 1992, it was folded into a year so disastrous for the royal family that the Queen herself would later call it her annus horribilis. 3 royal marriages collapsed in a single year, and Anne's was one of them. A union that began with Olympic dreams and royal blessings ended not with fireworks, but with resignation. Despite heartbreak, Anne refused to retreat and instead doubled down on her royal duties. At 74, she suffered a concussion, but that didn't stop her. Because for Anne, duty isn't an option. It's who she is. While others stepped back, she leaned in. And in 2024, a year when the monarchy wavered under the weight of health crises and public uncertainty, Princess Anne emerged not as a figurehead, but as its anchor. She didn't just show up, she led. With 457 engagements, she surpassed every other working royal, outpacing even her brother, King Charles, and her nephew, Prince William. But these weren't ceremonial appearances or carefully staged photo ops. Anne did the heavy lifting. Behind palace walls and on public platforms, she remained tireless. Even a serious concussion couldn't derail her. After a brief recovery, she returned to duty with the same grit that had defined her for decades, quietly reminding the nation who the monarchy truly leans on in times of strain. To Anne, retirement isn't a phase, it's a betrayal of purpose. When asked about stepping back, she brushes it off with a shrug, almost confused by the idea. The concept doesn't align with her worldview, because from the moment she understood the weight of her last name, she accepted its cost. That mindset wasn't born in isolation, it was inherited. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip never made excuses. They never slowed, unless absolutely forced to. Anne absorbed that ethos like oxygen. From her earliest years, she watched them move from one duty to the next without pause, without complaint. And now, she mirrors it with unflinching loyalty. For her, this isn't just tradition, it's identity. Even during the global pandemic, when royals retreated behind palace walls, Anne stood firm. While public engagements were canceled, she found ways to adapt. She connected virtually, visited essential services, and offered stability in a world unraveling. And while most over 70 were urged to isolate, Anne remained visible, embodying resilience at a time the public needed it most. Experts have praised her for years, not because she courts attention, but because she doesn't. Her value lies in consistency, in discipline, in showing up when it would be easier not to. Now, with King Charles undergoing treatment and Catherine facing her own private battle, Anne has taken on something even more profound. She's mentoring Princess Charlotte. Behind the scenes, the future Queen-in-Waiting is quietly being guided by the most seasoned royal of them all. And there's no better example. Anne has navigated scandal without scandalizing, endured heartbreak without spectacle, and proven that true leadership doesn't always wear a crown. It carries weight in silence, in duty, in doing the work that others avoid. But while Anne was busy stabilizing the crown, Camilla was still coming to terms with the Queen's whispered request. Camilla wasn't expecting what Anne said. It wasn't an attack, but it wasn't a full endorsement either. The words were careful, composed, even respectful. But in the world of royalty, every syllable matters. And when Anne referred to her sister-in-law as not a natural fit, it wasn't just a passing remark, it was a fracture in an already fragile public image. The sentence didn't come with malice, but with weight. She followed it with praise, calling Camilla's support of the king absolutely outstanding, and noting her dedication to her royal role. But the contradiction was impossible to ignore. The compliment didn't erase the sting, it deepened the suspicion. Because when someone like Anne, who rarely speaks emotionally and never carelessly, chooses such deliberate phrasing, people listen. The monarchy had always been about symbols, crowns, traditions, ceremonies. But it was also about silence, loyalty, and unspoken truths. And Anne's words cracked open a truth long whispered in palace corridors, that Camilla, even now, even with a crown on her head, still lives in the shadow of doubt. Not just from the public, but from within the family. Her journey to Queen consort was anything but smooth. Marked by scandal, shaped by controversy, and constantly measured against the memory of Princess Diana, Camilla was never embraced in the way a royal wife usually is. And while the Queen had eventually offered quiet acceptance, the question remained, did Camilla ever truly meet her expectations? In the aftermath of Queen Elizabeth's death, Camilla's role came under sharper scrutiny. Her every move was dissected. Her body language, her statements, her silences. She was no longer just the wife of a king, she was now a face of the monarchy itself. And the public, ever watchful, was divided. Some saw a woman who had endured a decades-long campaign of hatred and emerged poised, composed, and loyal. Others saw a figure who had never truly earned her place. And Anne's words did nothing to calm the debate. In fact, they reignited it. The tension beneath Anne's diplomatic tone spoke volumes. It wasn't confrontation, it was calculation. A subtle message cloaked in civility. It hinted at unspoken conversations, quiet glances across royal dining tables, and a shared understanding among those born into the crown's burden. Camilla's legitimacy wasn't questioned outright, but it wasn't fully affirmed either. And in that space of ambiguity, 1,000 opinions rushed in. Some called Anne brave, others called her cruel. But everyone agreed on one thing. Nothing, Anne says, is accidental, because Anne knows what the monarchy is made of. She understands its fragility, and she knows that legacy isn't built on appearances, it's built on trust. And while Camilla wrestles with legacy, Anne holds tight to a duty passed from one monarch to another. The crown was passed, but something more powerful was passed from queen to daughter, and it lives on today. In the stillness of St. George's Chapel, as the world held its breath, Princess Anne stood motionless, watching the imperial state crown being lifted from her mother's coffin. For the first time in 70 years, the symbol of absolute duty was no longer resting above Queen Elizabeth's head. It was not just a ceremonial moment, it was an ending, a quiet, irreversible shift. And in that silence, Anne didn't weep, she didn't falter. But later, when asked how she felt, she said something that stunned many, a sense of relief. Not for herself, but for her mother. Relief that the burden, carried for so long with poise and control, had finally been set down. The weight of a kingdom, of silence, of unrelenting expectations gone. And only Anne truly understood just how heavy it had been. Behind her calm demeanor was a storm of personal grief. But that's the thing about Anne, she never let the public see what it cost her. As the world mourned a monarch, she was mourning a mother. Yet not once did she step out of line. Not once did she let emotion override duty. And that restraint, so often misunderstood, and was not coldness. It was a strength. It was the same strength her mother had shown through decades of global crisis, family scandal, and private sorrow. And now, it was Anne who carried that torch. Not because she wore a crown, but because she embodied everything it stood for. Her continued commitment is no longer just about royal protocol. It's become a living tribute. a reflection of the Queen's values in real time. With every engagement, every speech, every quiet gesture of discipline, Anne is writing a new chapter, one her mother would be proud of. The public sees it too. They see more than a daughter. They see a steady hand in unstable times. A woman who never asked for attention, but now commands respect. She has become the monarchy's moral compass. And though the crown sits on another's head, the Queen's final wish was never about regalia. It was about continuity, quiet dignity, steadfast service. And Anne, more than anyone, has carried that vision forward with unwavering grace. Because sometimes the truest heir to a queen wears no crown at all. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.